Hello and welcome to Newsmax Now. I'm John Bach.
And I'm Miranda Kahn. Coming up this hour, the investigation continues with almost 200 arrests after that Texas biker brawl. 9 are dead. See why cops say the owners of a restaurant where the shootout occurred may have been asking for trouble.
And remember all that talk about control of the internet being transferred out of the United States? Well, that could happen by the end of the year. We'll talk about if concerns about the plan to privatize the web are really warranted.
And with a record number of Americans on food stamps, federal authorities may no longer have time to determine eligibility, what they say they can no longer handle.
All that and much more coming up today on Newsmax Now.
And good afternoon and welcome to this Monday edition of Newsmax Now.
It's good to have you with us. Amtrak trains rolling again through Philadelphia after last week's deadly derailment. We'll talk about that coming up in the investigation in a few moments. But first, nearly 200 people, as you heard Miranda mention, are now facing charges after that biker gang shootout down in Texas. All 192 arrested will at least face charges of engaging in organized crime. 9 people were killed in the melee at a Waco, Texas restaurant, and 18 more were hurt when several biker groups met at a sports bar.
There were bodies still there. It was a very gruesome, very violent crime scene. You could tell that there were numerous rounds exchanged. I saw everything from pistol casings to rifle casings. I saw knives. I saw a club.
Well, police say they knew about the meeting of 5 biker gangs in advance, but they could not interfere. Cops say the managers of that restaurant welcomed the bikers at that Twin Peaks sports bar and grill.
Police are no longer welcome to certain military equipment. The White House made changes following a public outcry over military hardware. Officers used the equipment during protests like the ones we saw in Ferguson, Missouri. They're now banned from receiving things like grenade launchers, armed aircraft, and tracked armored vehicles.
And Amtrak is rolling again through Philadelphia after last week's deadly crash. The first northbound train out of Philly left a little after 6 o'clock this morning, and reporters aboard that train say it slowed to a crawl at the same curve where the train jumped the tracks in that deadly accident. Amtrak says crews worked around the clock to make needed repairs. Funerals for 3 more of the 8 people killed are being held today. Investigators still have not figured out why that train was going over 100 miles per hour at the time of the crash, more than twice the speed limit for that area.
The FBI is now investigating claims that a security researcher hacked into a plane's computer and changed its course mid-flight. Chris Roberts was booted off a United Airlines flight while it was on the ground. An FBI warrant says Roberts claims to have hacked into the flight controls through the plane's entertainment system. But according to a statement to CNN by Boeing, that's unlikely because the two are isolated from each other.
One Marine is now dead and nearly 24 more are hurt in an aircraft accident in Hawaii. The Osprey tilt rotator aircraft suffered what's being described as a hard landing during a training exercise.
It's tragic, and our condolences go to the families and to the loved ones of the victim, but right now we need to investigate further and see what happened.
The aircraft hit the ground at Bellows Air Force Station in Oahu. 21 Marines and a Navy corpsman were on board. The injuries range from critical to minor.
ISIS seizes control over the Iraqi city of Ramadi. At least 500 people have died and more than 8,000 have been forced from their homes. ISIS did, however, suffer a loss in Syria after American special forces killed the Islamic State's head of oil operations. Forces also captured the man's wife, along with some digital information.
Hillary Clinton is back campaigning in Iowa today. She'll meet with grassroots organizers and then participate in a roundtable discussion tomorrow. Later this week, Clinton will visit New Hampshire. It's still unknown when Mrs. Clinton will take questions from the media. It has been about 3 weeks since she took any questions at all from reporters.
And it's crunch time for the Senate. At the end of the week, lawmakers will take off for the Memorial holiday daybreak, but before they do, they will tackle some major issues like the future of the Patriot Act. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell wants a simple reauthorization of bulk collection of records, but he faces some challenges from both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, and the House has already passed a bill to end the NSA's bulk collection programs.
Enrollment in Medicaid is way up, and some Republican governors are now blaming Obamacare. Florida's Rick Scott is one of them. He tells Politico that the surge in Medicaid enrollees under Obamacare will cost his state of Florida $5 billion over the next 10 years. More than 12 million people have signed up in the last year and a half, far exceeding expectations. The federal government will pick up all of the expenses for the next year, but then it scales back, leaving the states to pick up the rest of the tab.
presidential hopefuls and politicians all making the rounds on this weekend's Sunday shows.
Oh, they had a lot to say,
Yeah.
but if you were too busy to catch those Sunday talk shows, and can't really blame people, it was a nice Sunday for a lot of folks out there. Don't worry, we have your back. We were watching them.
First up, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker on the importance of foreign policy back in 2016. Foreign policy, rather, going into 2016.
The contrast will be clear because everywhere, just about everywhere that Hillary Clinton has played a role with this president, under President Obama, that part of the world is largely a failure, a mess, because of the policies that we've seen from Obama and Clinton.
Well, also Scott Walker over the weekend talking like a lot of the Republican potentials did about Jeb Bush's response. It's amazing how that comment kind of focused everybody's attention.
That moment.
A lot of them seized that moment, and we also want to talk about somebody who seized that moment. We'll talk about Marco Rubio again coming up here later on the show, but Marco Rubio talking about foreign policy, another presidential hopeful. He was asked specifically whether or not the U.S. should have invaded Iraq. Let's take a listen.
The question I was asked is what you know now. Well, based on what we know now, I think everyone agrees.
Was it a mistake? Was it a mistake to go to war with Iraq?
It was.
I'm asking you to.
Yeah, I understand, but it's not the same question.
But that's the question I'm asking you. Was it a mistake to
It
go
was
to?
not a mistake for the president to decide to go into Iraq because at the time he was told.
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you.
In hindsight,
Yes.
no, the world is a better place because Saddam Hussein is not there.
So that's the question, the difficult issue that a lot of these candidates are going to have, trying to justify what happened in 2003, which some mentioned was already a mistake. Marco Rubio's putting himself out there saying, you know, in fairness to him, it is impossible to know. You know, you can't always look back.
It's true, but it's a valid question and one that people should be prepared to answer if they're running to be president.
And people forget, too,
especially Jeb Bush.
how big of an issue this was in 2008. And the person who perhaps is benefiting the most in this, maybe hasn't been talked about as much as Barack Obama. He voted against the Iraq invasion in 2003 when he was a senator. We haven't heard that talked about a lot. Hillary Clinton voted in favor of the Iraqi invasion. And, you know, the public sentiment in this country in that time was definitely, there was this, I feel like, momentum towards.
But I think people were well aware of what they thought was going on, that they were using what happened during 9/11 to somehow make that connection to Iraq. I mean,
Right,
I think
and
people...
maybe that's a better question too, you know, specifically tying the 9/11 attacks to the Iraq War. And that's maybe for further debate. We'll see if that comes. Let's talk also about Dianne Feinstein on ABC's This Week, talking about the weekend ground attack that killed a high-level ISIS member. Let's take a listen to her sound.
If we're not going to put troops on the ground, then we've got to use our special operations forces to go in and collect intelligence, also be able to capture people that might be able to be helpful. This is the second time this has been tried in Syria. The first time it was not successful. That was to rescue hostages. But now this was, I think, a picture-perfect raid. Everything went according to plan.
So the other big story from this weekend, U.S. capturing supposedly the guy in charge of ISIS's oil operations, their chief financial officer, as it were. Hearing Dianne Feinstein talk about if we are not going to put boots in the ground, which is an interesting proposition when you look at the conversation now about Iraq involving Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio. And
no one wants to say that thousands of soldiers died unjustly.
Right.
That's really the bottom line. People are struggling with that answer because no one wants to say, yeah, it was a mistake, and those people died in vain. Nobody wants to say it.
Meantime, we have these military operations that we just saw Senator Feinstein talking about. Special operations, Army Delta Forces going into Syria, again, a sovereign country, and doing an operation there.
I think it's scary when you start talking about boots on the ground. Will it be necessary? I hope not.
Well, this weekend,
no one wants to get dragged into another
I believe it was
war.
Rick Santorum this weekend in Iowa talking about bombing them back into the Stone Age. There is going to be this discussion. There's going to be this debate. And always, it's the checkbook, the bottom line. Your pocketbook. People with their pocketbooks, folks say this year might be foreign policy. We'll see.
Well, a lot of people think we go to war to make money.
Whoa.
No, I'm
Good
telling you,
topic
I've
for
talked
a
to
panel.
soldiers that have said that they believe it's all...
Well, when we come back, we're going to be talking about a couple GOP presidential candidates who are giving us a little bit of a tease today, including Senator Lindsey Graham. Why this certain senator and one Ohio governor think they can help contribute to the presidential campaign this year.
And speaking of boots on the ground, we now know the names of the Marines killed last week in Nepal, plus what we are learning about the helicopter crash. That's all coming up. You're watching Newsmax Now.